Hello, everybody, and welcome to another one of these live stream sessions with myself and Adrian Beasley is joining me tonight. Adrian from deep in the forest.
It's my back garden.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us. This is a slightly different evening, and hopefully you can all see us a little larger than usual at the moment. You won't be seeing us like that for long, I'm afraid. But the idea was to get into some creative conversations. I think that's the best way to put it, about how we might approach editing. We've got some fantastic examples, and thank you so much, everyone who's sent
Yeah.
in some of their raw files. We really appreciate that. Adrian and I have picked out a selection, haven't we, Adrian, that we think might have some things for us to look at and might be interesting, but we haven't managed to pick everybody's because there were way too many. But that's
Yeah.
fine, because we'll hopefully be doing more of these. And so that gives us a bit of a library to go back and jump into. As ever, if you let us know where you're watching from, and that would be fantastic. So just drop us a little comments in the box. And what's going to happen throughout the course of the evening, Adrian and I are just going to switch between Lightroom develop modules, and we'll be having conversations between us and hopefully with you guys engaged as well. And so I would ask you all, if you do have any queries as we go along, or thoughts about the edits or impressions, whatever it might be, not funny ones, do drop those in the comments box, and Adrian and I will pick them up as we go. There is a lot going on technically tonight between us and between the shares and the live streams, but we're okay, aren't we, Adrian? We're confident.
Well, yeah. Touch wood. Touch woods. And I think it's as much about really just looking at some alternatives and looking at options. It's not supposed to be a techie session, really. It's really more to see how we might, which direction we might go with pictures and where they might lead us. And what I thought was really nice when you suggested it, Sam, was I really like the idea that we might both have a go and might go in different directions, and I just think that would be really nice, because there's no right button, there's no button for a perfect image. So, and we all have a different view of where we'd like to take it. So it's just quite fun to have a go and see what we get.
Yeah, definitely. And when we asked, and we're going to get into it in a minute, don't worry, everyone, but just letting a few people join, and thank you everyone that's jumping on, letting us know where you are: Brussels, Lincolnshire, Northumberland, Wimbledon, Melton Mowbray, and all sorts of places like that. So thank you, everyone. There's some caveats in that we asked for some images you might be having troubles with. We asked for some images that might be your favorites. So we've got a bit of a mix here, and we might talk about other things as well to do with composition and whatnot. But let's see how we go. But Adrian, let's get into it, shall we? Would you want to start us off, and we can start the share?
Okay, so let's just do my screen. Let's see how that goes. Okay, so we've got some images that we put in together. These are the originals of the images as they're sent in, and what we thought we would do is have a look and see where they may go, what we might do with them. But as I said at the beginning, really these are just ideas, and these are just thoughts. They're not. There's no solution to an image edit, and we'll each have our own experiences to apply. So in this case, this one, just outside of Melton Mowbray, I think. So we'll have a look at this. So hopefully you can see the screen okay. Just kind of fold away the other side so we've got a little bit more room to see it. So so we're looking at an image here. It's a lovely, I guess, morning shot here, and it's got that lovely soft misty feel. But so if that's the kind of thing that grabs you and you'd like to try to make something more out of that, it might be interesting to see if we can work on this image and try to enhance that feeling. So for me, when I saw this one, I mean, I like that foreground, some very nice crisp corn here in the foreground. These corn ears are rather lovely. And there's something funny and special about this kind of texture. But really, so there's all this softness here as well, and the sky sort of fading into the background. So I thought, when I looked at this, I thought, yeah, okay, so let's see if we might enhance that feeling, and possibly maybe even make this this foreground corn a little bit softer. That might be a nice thing to do. So I thought of heading in a direction which might sort of help us to, say, soften that general background, One way I might do that is to just, kind of lift the shadows and really just try to see where that goes. Obviously, the focal point in here is the building here. So having kind of softened that up a bit, and we're looking here at the background white, which is the sort of maximum value that the image might attain. The house itself and the trees around it looking rather dark and just a little bit too much shadow there. So I think we'll need to lift that. But even the sky here is still quite dark relative to the potential that we could go to. So I might be looking just still further to just raise that up a bit, just make that a little paler, so it's less dominant in the image. I think the other thing that kind of grabs me about the image is it's just not focused maybe quite as much as it could be. So I might just bring a little bit off of the overall top, bottom perhaps. That just feels a little bit tighter, feels a little bit nicer to me. And if you like panoramic images, you maybe could go a little bit wider on that. That just feels a little better. That sky was not really adding a great deal, so I felt that was quite nice. And I really need to bring forward now I think this house. I think it looks like it's catching some early morning sun, but it's very faint early morning sun, and the shadows are rather overbearing in and around the trees. Now, but part of the problem, if I kind of throw a bit of light in here, is I'm going to lose a bit of a bite and contrast to the image. So I think I just need to recover a little bit of that bite and a little bit of that contrast. And of course, these little bit wispy areas here at the corners, just getting into that, so they'll be picked up by it as well. But for the moment, at least, I'm just going to have a look at returning a little bit of
Adrian,
that early morning light. Yes.
Sorry, if I can just a comment, actually, just a thought. Would you think it's fair to say that because we've lightened up other parts of the image, suddenly that house and surrounding trees did feel even darker because they're affected by the relative brightness around them? Because at first,
absolutely, 100%.
Look, they weren't, were they?
Yeah, 100%. That is absolutely right. And often with an image, we want to go in a particular direction, but you can't because you're already too far in that direction already. So you have to actually go in the other direction. So you're absolutely right that it's that contrast, introducing the contrast, that matters. So, you might want to make something a little brighter, but often the best way to make something brighter is to make something else darker. So if you bring that idea to editing, that can be really powerful. We can run out of histogram. We can run out of space to make things brighter. We can block up the highlights, and we can lose detail if we're not careful. So sometimes it's much easier to make things darker around it. And somebody said to me, if you take that approach, you could do gum darkening rather than teeth whitening. I'm not sure that's universally applicable. I don't know if anybody's offering that.
If we've got any volunteers for some gum darkening, then you let me know on the comments. But sorry, I didn't want to jump in, but I thought it was a pertinent point.
Yeah, totally. And it is, in fact, the first step I did was exactly that. It was to take the background in the reverse direction to maybe the natural subject that we see here. So I thought we would do that. And yeah, there's going to be some extra light. Now I'm being quite crude and broad brushed about it. I've used a very large brush, if you like, to work in this area. I could have been more detailed. I could go in with a brush and be much more selective and much more detailed. That's a possibility. I could even make use of the fact that there's a substantial amount of green here, and use that as an element to pick up on, and then allow me to edit that in a perhaps a tighter, more localized way. But for the benefit of moving through images at a reasonable pace, I think that's a way to go. Now, I could look at the foreground here perhaps and soften that foreground, and in the process of doing that, that might give it a kind of more ethereal feel, and it might make that foreground just kind of fit in a little bit more with that soft background. So the whole thing starts to have more of a sort of integrated feel to it. And then, of course, it would be obvious to just wonder how that might look in black and white as well. So this image actually could work really well as a black and white image, as a high key black and white image. I think this it could very easily go in that direction. To that, we would need to lift much more of that darkness. just bring that up, and potentially in this area we may need to just make a little bit more out of the sharpness of that area, and that just to bring back a bit more contrast in that area to maybe just kind of sit there and bounce. So yeah, so several possibilities then. The image itself, it was just a little low in contrast. It was just it was quite a soft image, which is fine. I think perhaps the excess of sky wasn't really adding anything, so it's nice to sort of take that out and then just lift the tones. So yeah, let's have a look at the before after. So well, in fact, I do it this way. Yeah, so it's a different kind of image going in a different direction, but yeah, that's a possible option. So as I say, there's no right and wrong answer to editing. It's what you want to do, what you want to get out of it. But yeah, that's one possible route through that one.
Yeah, and I must say, I think actually when I first saw it, this image, what was nice about it is you get that real feeling of how it would have been to stand there, which is a lovely thing to get through in an image. But I think the points you make about the softness versus the texture, and actually my first thought, to be honest, was to go black and white with it, because some of the hues in the sky were a little pinky, bluey, kind of orangey, kind of that, not quite, you know what I mean. Doesn't float to my boat, and it's interesting to see what you're doing with it now. And cropping and aspect ratios we're going to talk about, I think is going to come up quite a bit in this. And because we've been getting your raws, we don't know necessarily. Some of you might have been using the aspect ratio in your live view or something like that, but the raw will bring the whole file in.
Yes, of course, that's right. So when we're looking at some of these images, that may well have been exactly what they've done in their mind as they've taken the picture. Of course, as you say, that we've had the raw, so we haven't had the benefit of any of their actual thinking of the time.
Yeah.
But so yeah, lovely.
Hopefully that's a good, it gives you a few different ideas there. And it's going to be quite a casual kind of walkthrough tonight. And we are using Lightroom just because Adrian and I both use it. I certainly use it primarily. Adrian uses Lightroom and different things. I won't speak for him, but we know a lot of you use different things, which is fine. What we're talking about is not necessarily the physical how-to. It's more the concept of thinking about what's in the image, and these thought processes we're applying are going to be relevant in any of your editing software that you use. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of good tools out there these days. There's some really good professional tools and some very good value tools for people that aren't perhaps so keen on paying monthly or buying big chunks of software on a regular basis. I mean, as an ex-software engineer, software engineers need to eat too. So I get the monthly idea. I think it's a good idea. I think the idea of keeping people focused on bug fixing and improving the products is better than trying to resell the whole package every couple of years to somebody, where the only way to do that is to come up with some outrageous feature that nobody really wants. So I get that, but at the same time, I understand that people that don't want to be doing a monthly thing, they just want to have one purchase and keep with that for a while.
Yeah.
Okay.
Should we pick out one of those other misty ones? Because we've got a lovely tree here.
Bit of a misty theme going. This one, yeah, I think we both, when we saw this one, we both went, ooh.
Yeah.
This is really lovely, isn't it? And the light coming in through this image, through from the side here, it is really beautiful. So, and unlike in the first image, actually, I think your thoughts immediately was to go to black and white. In this one, my thought was immediately to go to black and white too. Definitely felt that way for me. So if I take that in, and yes, it's about that tree, and it's also about the light, isn't it? So the feeling then is how to or where to take that. What would we do with this image? So I'm just going to move that out of the way for a second so we can see. So yeah, so now one of the problems with the sort of very bright or light images, and also high key generally, is the detail. If we lift the brightness of the image, which we can do in a number of different ways, we'll change the level of detail that becomes visible, and some of it will disappear. But in the parts that we are really interested in, the tree and the light coming through here, then it'd be nice if we could find a way to bring back some of the detail in those areas, even if we let the rest of the image become very soft. So it could be that we can focus our attention on the central section and protect that maybe from going too far. I think possibly with this one, it does benefit from being lighter generally. We've got quite a lot of darkness around the sides here, so I'm interested to see if we can soften those sides. So if I can maybe soften the sides independently of the central section, that would be nice. So I'm going to do something here which will help to bring the balance a little bit more in. Now it's interesting, we've got a darker patch developing here, and that's just the spread of light across here, naturally happening across here. I'm working on the outside of this, so I'm making changes to the outer section of the trees, but there is a dark section that was naturally there. And just as we were talking about in the other image, even though we've actually already raised the global exposure, this still feels a little dark here. So I might just bring that a little bit further. And then I might then just work on the tree itself. So the tree itself, I'd like that to kind of retain some sharpness. I want to retain the features of the fingers of the tree. So to do that, I need to put in some contrast in that area, and just use some contrast to bring that up. And then once I've done that, maybe continue to raise the luminance elsewhere. And once we do it, the outside is working quite nicely. So the section with these trees is working quite nicely. I might even be able to push them a little bit further. And the other thing I might do is I might just kind of defocus them somewhat to really emphasize the softness of the light. Now I'm just starting to lose the tops of these trees as well. Now this probably, I guess this shadow is probably cast by something that's on the left, perhaps catching the light a little bit more. But we've lost these beams, and obviously the beams would be really nice to recover. I'm just going to see if I can balance up the light in this area a little bit in order to just give us a more evenly distributed patch of light here. And then we'll see. So now thinking about those light beams, we notice the light beams because of differential in contrast, which we've rather successfully removed. So I'm going to now focus my attention on those light beams and see whether we might be able to coax them back just in the area that they seem to be at their best. So just starting to not that way, to bring them back in there, and I might need to rebalance then the light elsewhere based on where they're coming in. So there's a little bit of a juggle just to bring the two together at the moment. Mm-hmm.
I think, Adrian, is it fair to say that we're, all of this as well is making that tree the real star, isn't it? That's what I think you as well as accentuating those light, but, looking back to the original versus where we are now, I'm brought quite cleanly back towards that tree, and its structure is appealing to me.
Yeah, the structure of the tree is really important, isn't it? So that's what we're trying to sort of get to, see if we can bring that out. Now, the foreground here has started to catch my eye now, definitely. There's a bit of scrub here, which some people might prefer to remove. That depends on your persuasion. But I might just raise the luminance in this area and just soften it as well, so that it's a little bit more in keeping with the rest of the image. That might be a way to go. And then we've probably still got a little bit of the contrast here is still perhaps a little bit on the high side. Now, I'm doing a lot of work here, and I know that that's not what some people would like to do to their images. So this is really more of a having fun and seeing if we might bring out this element rather than saying that you should be doing this to all your images.
Yeah, I think that's it, isn't it? It's some things you go further with, and others you don't, and some things you go further with, then you rein back from, and some things you don't go far enough with, and then you need to go further on. So it's
So it's interesting actually. So I think when we looked at this the first time round, so this is just playing with it live, obviously. It's heading in a direction, but I think it needs more work, and I probably would work a little bit more just to balance up the light in this area. But it's heading in a direction. It's interesting. So also look at maybe picking up a couple of elements from the foreground and just cleaning up a few bits and pieces. But there's something lovely in that original image. So there's, this is not by any means, let's say, a replacement for the image. And I think you take this as a color image in its own direction. There's already rather beautiful softness to this light, which is why we both looked at it and thought, ooh, lovely. So yes.
With that in mind, shall I just do a 2 minutes devil's advocate on a color way to take that? Just out of interest. So I think what we'll do, if I can grab that actually, Adrian, I'll grab the screen share.
Yeah,
okay.
Let me just stop share. Okay.
So hopefully everyone can see that at my end now. Thank you, Adrian. He's been doing all the heavy lifting, so I thought I should probably jump in at some point.
Yeah.
I think, I won't spend long on this because Adrian's done a nice few bits there on the black and white. I think if we were thinking about it from a color point of view, there's a couple of ways I would look at it. I always have a quick look at the temperature that it's come in at as well. And with this sort of morning, I would imagine there was quite a warmth from that sun. So I'd be tempted to basically be looking at bringing that warmth back in through a global color adjustment. And I'm not going to go into it in any great detail, but I just did a couple of little bits while Adrian was doing the black and white as well. So
good. Yeah, great.
I think the first thing, just literal thing of just putting a little bit more of the light tones in there, and I actually did it just a quick boost up there, just for the brutality of doing it promptly. And we talked about clarity as well. So again, these are very quick looks at what I'm doing, but I want to get you to the end point just to explain kind of why I went that way. And temperature, I've just brought that back up. So I've added a little bit more warmth in overall to that temperature, tiny dehaze, and a tiny bit of a plus in the shadows just to bring it up. I think it was interesting what you mentioned about the foreground there, Adrian, and I was interested that you went in to probably bring that back down again to darken it off. I think for me, it works really nicely as being darker there, just as a little soft buffer at the bottom of the frame. And I think we talked about bringing people to the tree and to this area, isn't it? Is where the beauty and the
those
light
light is lovely, aren't they?
And I think by letting this just be not anything, just letting it be shadow, allows us just to lift up and into here. The only other, so if we look at that versus the, if we look at that versus the original, you can see I haven't done a huge amount here, but with that extra warmth, I think we're probably a lot closer to what the viewer might have been feeling as they were there and really seeing that sun, which we associate with being an orangey yellowy thing, sort of booming in. The only other thing I was going to say was just to watch your edges, and there's not, I mean, we call this border patrol, and I can see in woodland that's often a challenge, because you're always losing bits of something somewhere, and so you do have to just cut stuff off, don't you?
Yeah, definitely.
And I did fiddle with the crop a little bit to try and get rid of that, but then this becomes too tight here. So
you just, wherever you go, as you say, you're going to hit something, aren't you?
There's compromises. So one way might just be to whip that out with a quick sort of clone out. The other way is just to leave it in. You're in woods, there's woods coming at you, and that's kind of cool as well. So hopefully that's interesting to see us go a couple of different ways on that. Lynn's saying on the comments she likes the high key approach. It's something that I quite often use. It does seem to be something a lot of us are using. But let's move on from that, because we've given that a fair bit of time.
Sure.
Adrian, any preferences on where we go next? A different vibe perhaps might be nice.
Yeah, let's have a look at the architectural piece. That might be a nice one to look at.
Yeah,
so
I'll stop my share there.
Okay, so there's there are a couple that people sent in. Oh, and this is a slightly different interpretation here. So I've gone for the ultra soft around the edge, and really just to bring out the the tree. So
nice.
that feels nice. Although we don't see the beam so much, this feels rather lovely and soft for me. So I'm quite liking that. If I go back to here's an image here which somebody sent in. So this is fascinating. We look at this and you think, oh, interesting. What would you do with that? If you couldn't be in the right place and you had to take the picture maybe very quickly, you didn't have a tripod, you couldn't line things up, you could only just take that picture. Maybe it's possible you can't see here, but perhaps there's this kind of viewing area and you're not allowed in, and maybe there's lots of reasons. But we can see there's all sorts of interesting geometric things going on here. We've got this beautiful thing, painting in the middle is just kind of almost caught there. It's very squashed into one side, but lots of space here. So is there anything we can do? Well, there are some things we can do. They kind of tend to generate their own problems. So let's have a look and see. If we have a go at sort of correcting the geometry of it somewhat, then that will give us a starting point. And then, of course, we immediately run into the next problem. So we've lost parts of our image up here, which is not great. So we need to kind of try to recover from here. And to be honest, really, we've run out of steam inside Lightroom. That's about as far as we can go in Lightroom. So at this point, I'd probably have a look and see if I could coax a little bit more out of it in Photoshop. So we've got a bunch of problems going on here. We've got, obviously, having corrected it, we've now got problems missing parts of the images. And is it possible, I don't know, to fix it? I'm going to be mad and have a quick go. It might be possible to fix the image. So let's have a go with, let's just have a go with seeing if we might add in something in the missing area here and see whether we might be able to use something called content aware fill. I'm going to go for the bold option, which is kind of do or die option. We'll see if it's any good.
Whilst that's, Adrian, I must admit,
yep.
When I see images with big perspective things going on, I always kind of get in a slight sweat. So I'm happy you're doing this one.
Yeah, I'm not so happy I'm doing it myself. We'll see. Let's see. And this is literally a you had no choice, and there's nothing you could do when you took the picture. So you take the picture anyway, and you just hope that there might be something you can do on the way back. Well, I'm going to bring that back now, and because my fan is going bonkers, I'm just going to quick save out of Photoshop. Now I can see that the little bird in the top left-hand corner has had a few issues, but it may just be recoverable. We'll see. With any luck, we might still be able to recover it to some extent. Okay, so now I can crop it back in Lightroom and see how we're doing. So, missed the bit at the bottom. Okay, there's a little bit of weirdness going on. Okay, so the question is, did we actually make it any better? Well, I guess we can do go back to the grid and do a compare on that. Yeah, so we're looking at the original image. Did I take out the original? I took out the original one. So it's a case of, yeah, so you can see the distorted one there if I reset that one. Okay, so that's where we are. So we're looking at those two. Okay, so as I say, you were offset, you've got really bad angles here, you've got distorted. We can do a certain amount of correction there, and Photoshop can do a reasonably good job of patching up some of the missing elements and allowing us to bring back this beautiful central section of the painting, so of the ceiling. So there's some possibilities there. So if you have pictures that didn't quite make it, there is always that possibility of tweaking it and bringing it back, and the geometric corrections are pretty good in Lightroom, but when you get to things beyond basic geometric correction, then you're probably going to need to have a look at Photoshop.
Adrian, there's an image from St. Mark's Square in Venice, which is just below you there on the right,
Mhm.
which has a couple of perspective,
Mm.
I think, challenges. There's a couple of things, but it was one we both looked at and went, oh, love, there's something we can play with that. But I suppose first thing is, why did we think that? What was it that appealed to us?
Well, the reflection is beautiful, isn't it? And
Yeah.
I think the flooding there obviously is quite a common thing these days. And I think I saw a wonderful picture of a guy doing front crawl through the middle of that was amazing last year. So yeah, it's beautiful. The colours and the lighting on here actually is really beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it is a great shot with the reflection folded in rather beautifully. So yeah, if we had another go at the dealing with the perspective again, we could pick up on some element of the image, which is to give us a guideline for what needs to be horizontal. So we can do that, and also we have the tower here. Now the tower isn't necessarily straight vertical, and we've got another tower over this side. They might be, but they could equally be leaning backwards. So it might be that those edges are not really telling us the truth. So I wouldn't trust these. But having done some correction, we might then be able to recover what we have cropped, so long as we don't end up losing something important out of the image. Now there is, of course, a bit of junk over that right-hand side, so we'd probably quite like to get rid of that anyway. It might be that reflection's a little bit aggressive, but then we'll lose the top of the reflection, which is not so good. So again, that might be a possible result to Photoshop, maybe to save the day. And we could possibly remove that, because it's going to drag our eye out of the frame down the bottom here, and some of these other brighter patches as well. So we may choose to crop that a little bit more aggressively, actually, center up on the actual church itself. And then I think we may have, so these poles, whether the poles are actually completely vertical or not is another matter. Now, sometimes when we do the correction on that image, it just doesn't look right. There's something not quite right about it. And we might need to just revisit some of the elements that we may not have got exactly right. That might help, and then recrop. But I think when you looked at this, I think you were looking at it as, again, potentially to take it in this direction, and maybe crop in much tighter as well, and focus entirely on the central section here, which is a perfectly good idea, I think.
Yeah, I think there was a few things that were disturbing me as we've talked about that rubbish on the right. There's the glimmer of the reflection on the bottom left.
Yeah.
Which I know we've just got a bottom left frame, but we've been pulling that in. But it's interesting that sometimes we get so far with kind of removing things that we lose the general positioning of the general placement of the subject within its surroundings, if you see what I mean. And there's always a compromise there of, do I have to go so far because I'm then just isolating this subject. Now, sometimes that's right. Sometimes you want to isolate it and you have had way too much in the frame. And there are other times where things live within their environment, such as this being in the square, and you get the left and right of it is quite nice. I think it's interesting you've gone black and white, because I definitely went that way as well. But I wonder if the photographer, again, they might have been in a situation where they couldn't really move left or right. They might even have had other people with them. They might have had an aspect ratio up in their live view again. So because I would suspect they would have spotted the reflection in the bottom left and probably the rubbish on the right. And ideally we would try and get rid of that when we're there, but not always possible.
Yeah, indeed. And as you said before, this is a raw file, so they may well have planned to crop that later. So that's nice. And of course, there are other possibilities. If we had a look at the reflection on its own, maybe that's an image in its own right. That's always a possibility too. So, okay, interesting.
Nice.
Lovely. Yeah.
Did you any preference? Because there's an image, which We
Yeah, let's have
both
a look at this
found
one.
intriguing, didn't we?
We did, absolutely. Yeah, wasn't this lovely? I mean, I think your first comment was you could make that wall size, blow it
Mm.
right up and have it on your wall. And wouldn't it be fantastic? So it's very detailed. And when you first see it, you think, what on earth is it? And then, of course, it's suddenly obvious what it is. But, you know, I looked at this and I thought, oh, this is fantastic. You know, you could find a little element of it. I bet there's one here saying, you know, it's about time you did the washing up. And you know, it's a community, isn't it, of birds here all together and all similar colours to the rocks and the detritus here. So what do you do? Do you, and I guess it was a bit like your comment about woods, you know, it can be tricky to make something out of it when it's so detailed and so busy. And certainly one of the possibilities is to home in. Well, one is to go, as you said, go full blown and have that as a nice big high detail shot. Another potential might be, and I think what I looked at doing was picking out elements, picking out parts of the image which might work really well in perhaps a slightly smaller, so that we kind of home in, and then I started to see whether there might be sections of the image which might have a bolder and stronger feel to them. So I've kind of looked at whether I might highlight those. So again, as you said before, it's taking the opposite approach. So I make them lighter by making everything else darker, and then that naturally brings your eye into the section of interesting strip of gold through here, which looks very nice. So that was a way of doing it. And then, you know, let's say there are plenty of other possibilities. If I just reset the image and then have another thought, well, the other thought was to be a bit more creative. We haven't done anything super creative yet. So I thought maybe we could do something a bit wacky. And one interesting option here, which sometimes works, and this one was rather interesting. And the idea of thinking, well, these were gulls. Maybe they were birds on an iceberg. So this is from a distance. I thought was quite another interesting alternative way to go. Again, you might focus in on an element of that, but the structure in the rock comes out really beautifully. I thought that was really lovely. That central section in particular. This is really lovely. It just looks like ice. And the blueness in there is almost, let's say, giving you that kind of impression that maybe it's an iceberg.
I was going to say about the color, because I really loved the way you did that. It was a very different way to approach it, which was great. And my brain probably doesn't work in that direction, but that blueness is then something you could play with, isn't it? That temperature of, I mean, blue and white, when we're talking ice and snow, the smallest amounts of change can really affect feeling towards that. And so I'm interested to see, you know, as you're adjusting that there, it makes a big difference.
Yeah, and it obviously it's a completely fake image. It's a completely manipulated image, but that's okay. And there's a place for that, I think. And yeah, and obviously we're doing this quite quickly. So I'd be looking around the edges and making sure we're not cutting birds in half and various other hazards that we have for an image like this. But I think that has some potential. I quite like that as a more creative option. And then those of you that I know, I've met plenty of you who are incredibly creative. I really love some of the ways that people's brains think. There are lots of things that are staring out at us. So maybe there's a face there in the rock. I don't know. Quite like that. That's definitely face-like for me. And look at this image. This image has a lot of detail. So it has quite a lot to give. So you could make a lot of different images from this particular.
That's the thing with cameras these days, and the image sensor size and the quality they're recording. You know, obviously we preach good practice of framing as you wish to capture at the time. And actually, one thing we did see in a lot of the submissions, which by the way, we really thank you for all the submissions, and we've got a few more we're going to look at. But there was a lot where we, as Adrian and I had a sort of dummy walk through some of these just to pick out ones to choose. There were a lot where we did find ourselves cropping in a little bit. And I think it's a common thing that in this case, it's just like for a slightly different reason creatively, but where we were having to drop out a lot of the extraneous detail. And actually, if I can, Adrian, there was one great example, not strictly of that per se, but where I think the photographer had a similar sort of vibe. And again, I don't want to presuppose that, because we don't know is the short answer. But when we're looking at the data of some of the images, it's quite interesting to see the time they were shot, and because a few of you sent up 2 or 3 images from similar places, and this is one example of that. And I think I know exactly where this was. In fact, I'm guessing this was actually in Slovenia. I could be completely wrong, but it was very reminiscent of some of the images we saw from the tour, virtual tour we did there with Ben Graham, because there's all these beautiful reflections that you can play with. Again, I could be completely wrong here. But what was interesting, and just picking up on your point, Adrian, was that the photographer took this shot and then literally about a minute later took that shot. And just for me, as someone who sort of is very interested in compositional choices when we're in the field, and I kind of rave on about that as much as I can whenever I'm out with people, I think it was clear, I guess, that the photographer made that jump in their mind of, okay, this is something good, this is really interesting, the colors here, the structures here, the texture, the light, everything else, but is this big band of blue, of the sky and the reflection helping? Answer, no. And therefore they then took it on themselves to correct that visually in the field. And that, I think, is a sign of visual awareness, which is fantastic. And it's and I think, that's made it a stronger image, because we understand it's a reflection still. I think in terms of the edit, well, it's really difficult, because I tend to I tend not to go too far on a great deal, and this is one where I think I don't know about you, Adrian, but I wouldn't do a huge amount.
It doesn't need much, does it?
No. It's
a very beautiful soft image, and it's got some lovely colours in, and I love that dark black tree running through it. It's really very beautiful image.
And I think crop wise they've done it, and that was the point I wanted to make and pick up on. They've seen it and they've realized and they've come in on it, and all I've done is just given it the little bits of boost, because we're talking about a raw rather than a JPEG. And I think on the back of the camera, the viewer would probably have been seeing something like that with maybe a little bit more, whatever. And you could play with that more or less to try and pull people into certain areas. But I actually like the chaos of it, because it's held together by these big strong verticals, and like Adrian said, this big dark one here as well. So we just wanted to point that out as a good job of the photographer to spot it.
Certainly.
I think edit wise, Adrian,
I mean, I'd say if you're having one of those days where you're having fun with playing with the images, then a lot of people like to turn those up the other way around and pretend, but actually it's great as it is. I think you're right. I don't think it really needs very much else doing to it. But the observation of those 2 shots was terrific. And in fact, the one that you've just moved on to next is another example of that. I think that soon as soon as we both saw that, we both looked at it and thought, oh, lovely. And then only through the process of saying, well, okay, so what would you do, or what could you do if you wanted to do something with it? I think I explored a rather darker version of this image, which, this is in many ways beautiful, soft woodland image again, but I quite liked exploring the darkness of going harder to the left with the temperature, and bringing that, and that process brings through some really interesting dark tones, which I quite liked, much more menacing. I think sort of Scandi noir picture, I think we were talking about, which is an interesting option. Yeah.
Well, I might throw to you, because I mean, if the sort of classic, very traditional approach to this would be to think, if we look at the original, it was very cool. Sorry, it's actually even cooler than that, wasn't it? 3/7. So I wonder if they had auto white balance set, and it was slightly thrown by these the blues and the shadow, which that's probably what's happened.
That's quite probable.
So the first feeling was it's super cool. So I think if you were going more the traditional route, you'd be talking about just warming it up a little and just giving everything a little boost there. And again, if we have a look at that compared to the raw cold kind of coming in. But do you want to do a little bit on that, Adrian, just for a couple of minutes, and then, taking it a little bit crazy? Not crazy, but, different.
Crazy, just different, just having fun. I mean, it's really interesting, actually, because I just enjoy working with images, and it's not for the sake of, it's not making them weird and wacky necessarily. I just enjoy, as I always used to enjoy being in the darkroom. I love playing with images, and there was something that led me to want to just take a little off the bottom of this image. I don't know exactly what it was, but it did feel to me like it wanted to head that direction. But yeah, certainly heading in this direction, and I say it was a dark and somber look, quite the opposite of perhaps the way that the image really does look at the moment. So trying to just bring that down. I'm thinking, well, if I wanted to make something look really moody and dark, then this image has a lot to offer in all sorts of different directions. It's quite nice to make out something of the reflections, and I just felt that would be quite nice to bring those out a little bit more in the water, just add a little bit more contrast in the water. But I did rather like the moodiness of the image, and that it, whilst it had a beautiful look in the way that you were editing it there, in that sort of soft, warm, rich tones, I don't know why, just kind of coming towards a darker look too, and maybe even that has to tighten up on that side. So for me, that if you're looking for something a little different, maybe there's a potential there for going in a quite different direction with the colours.
Yeah,
quite artificial. Say this a very Scandi noir. Feels like somebody's dragging a body through here.
Yeah. Well, on that lovely tone, maybe they were darkening their gums. Couple of quick things I'm going to pick up on the comments, and sorry if I haven't been getting to them. I've been sort of, eyes are everywhere.
Yeah.
Quick question, Adrian, when you say a quote unquote soft image, I thought that meant out of focus and not good, but you seem to think it can sometimes think that can be an advantage. I suppose selective softness is what we were talking about, perhaps.
Yeah, so in that first image, which was with the mist and so on, so the softness of the elements of the landscape that are covered in that mist, everything's become soft, and also the wispiness of the corneas and so on that we saw in this one. So it has a kind of softness to it, although and in fact even this part was quite soft, because the house itself was slightly misty, was actually a lot darker, wasn't it? The shadows were darker, so it was perhaps a little harder in that central area. But yeah, I quite often add to the softness. I quite often push maybe the texture down as a way of defocusing the image, and that's something I do quite like. But in this is not a bad image to have a quick look at. So the image here has the central section here is much brighter than everything else, and the outer sections perhaps aren't really adding to the image. But if I darken the outer section, it not only appears to lighten the inner section, which of course is just that negative response again, the opposite response, but it also appears to get a little bit sharper, even though it isn't really at all. But just that act of taking down the outer section really allows us then to work on the inner section, maybe in a slightly different way. So the lack of saturation that would have come with this early morning light, perhaps streaming through here, might need to make up a little bit, because that warmth is being filtered out a little. Yeah, and we've also, I've just done it with saturation, but perhaps the right way to do that might have been to look at the color temperature first. To look at the color temperature first, and then maybe have a look and see whether the saturation needed anything at all. So I think on this kind of that lovely tunnel type image that you would hope to get, and wow, when you're lucky, lucky to get the stag here as well. So maybe I would just want to make him a little bit sharper and bring him out a little bit more in the image, just to give it a little focal point. But that's I think this is a wonderful kind of image. Certainly enjoying that.
If we and if we look back at what you came in with, Adrian, obviously we will in due course, but I think that's
So it's just really, this is okay. We changed the color temperature, but we haven't changed the luminance at all. It's just everything's happening around the outside of that section. So, taking notice of the outer section and maybe just balancing that so that it doesn't dominate. The eyes wandering around here, picking up on all the contrasty bits around here. So there's some outer focus leaves that are just on the edge of the frame here. I'll probably want to just soften those and make sure they didn't distract the eye. So there's a little bit bright here. And I'll just use the adjustment brush to just take the brightness out of those so that, that you're not distracted from the central subject.
Yeah, I think that was quite a higher ISO shot as well, wasn't it, Adrian, that coming in? But,
That's 2,500, yeah.
And with a 400 mil, wow. Yeah.
5.6. So yeah, I guess, whoa, quick, spot that, quick, grab it. Yeah, so what did you manage? 8,000ths of a second. There we go. So handheld that. Lovely. Well done.
Yeah, well done,
for grabbing that moment. I'm actually looking at the histogram, so I wasn't taking too much notice of the histogram there, but there's room for that to lighten up there. There's plenty of room to keep that brightness in there. So make that look nicer for a print.
And I think what's just to pick up on the point about the softness and about, like you've done with focusing the eye there a little, any of these things that we might use in the edit can elicit an emotional response. Sometimes that emotional response is something as the photographer, we're seeking to bring back in that was relevant to our time and our interaction with the scene and with the landscape and with the subject or whatever it might be. And other times we might be thinking about helping. We might not be thinking straightforwardly in our mind quite as consciously as this, but we're thinking about helping the viewer connect to this in a human way or in a subconscious way. And there are certain things that will do that, to do with light and shade, to do with color, to do with temperature, to do with what Adrian's done here, for example, of showing, we're really seeing very obviously what the focus is and that there's light literally at the end of this tunnel. So there's all sorts of these baggage things mentally that we bring with us to images. And I suppose our job is to obviously do our best to capture that in the field. But also if you did have a feeling of let's take that Scandi noir woodland shot a minute ago. If you were there on your own in that morning and it was quite scary and it was cold and then it's quite cool to think about, how do I bring that back into the edit? How do I get some of my feeling back into that was there? So I would encourage you to think about that.
Yeah, definitely. I think you're absolutely right, Sam. So I think when you're stood there, you have the warmth or the coldness, so you have the wind or, there's all those other elements that are going on that don't get captured in the image. And the camera does not capture what you see. It captures the light, but it's not what you see. Your brain does all sorts of wacky things with, removing distractions. You don't see these things here because your attention is here. So there's a lot of things going on in the way that you actually have perceived the scene that the camera simply doesn't capture. So the edit process is not about necessarily bringing pure reality, which is what the camera's capturing. Is trying to bring back, as you say, the feeling and the of the space and what you felt when you were there. I think that's what we try to do.
Yeah, definitely. What do we think, Adrian? Have we got time for one more?
Yeah, we could do. I was just wondering about. We could have a look at that one, or we could have a look at this one.
Yeah, because we were going to.
That one.
Yeah, go on, because you had some thoughts creatively about it. And just before I let Adrian loose on that one, just big thank you for everyone who's been watching and keeping along with us through the course of this session. We'll have a little look at one more. We've got plenty more in the queue that we didn't even get to tonight, plus a load of others. Plus, I'm going to ask you to keep sending them in. And what I would say, everybody, is I'm just going to put a quick poll up where asking just about whether you guys would enjoy some more of these sessions, whether you found them interesting, insightful, useful, inspirational, depressing, whatever it might be. And so hopefully you'll be able to see that for those of you watching live. Just a quick question, would you enjoy more of these sessions? Because I think we quite enjoyed doing them, Adrian, and it'd be quite nice to see what people send in, especially if you've been on a Light and Land tour somewhere and you've got some shots from that you'd like us to take a look at. That'd be interesting. But Adrian, let's, just for time purposes, do you want to have a little play with this? Because again, there's something, isn't there? Something
yes.
that we know we can do something with.
Yeah, and So I looked at this and we had a look at squaring it up and a few other things. There's obviously something in here for everyone, and this boat in the foreground and the seagulls perhaps not the greatest of subject matter. So you kind of looked at squaring this off and cropping it up. Maybe we could get a feeling of what we wanted to get from it. And I looked at it a few times and I thought, well, maybe there is something else in this image that is just lurking beneath the surface. So I had a look at whether we might use that part in some way. So there's some possibilities here, and it's a bit of fun to work with images that are like this. I think maybe square it up a little bit here, and there's the scale. Let's bring that back in a little bit. So pulling out an element of the image that might might be a bit of fun. In fact, okay, so actually look at the doorway. To transform and pick up a guide. Let's have a look at that vertical. It's a bit better. Okay, better. Yeah, I thought that was rather fun. And then from there, have a look at the edit to see where we might be able to raise the. So perhaps it's because there's so little color here. I think maybe monochromatic approach is the way to go on this image. And then type the whites out a little bit further. So yes, I thought this was potential for working with. And there are also, depending on the quality of the image, there's sort of little elements of this which are rather lovely, where the ripples of the water interact with the kind of ripples of the architecture, which can be really interesting. So depending on the resolution of the image, you might be able to find some lovely smaller elements of the picture, which could be really, really nice. Now, because of the reflection in the water here, I think we've got a lot darker or a lot lighter band just at the very bottom, which you probably want to just even up and just bring that down a little. Just square that off. Yeah, so hours of fun.
Nice. Good.
And there's actually a lot of nice textures in these gratings by the sides of the doors here, and there's a lovely interaction between the ripples of the water and the patterns in these gratings. And that might be, and it's one of these things actually. If you do this editing whilst you're away, you'll look at these things and go, "Oh wow, let's go shoot that," because that's fantastic. So and then your focus of the next day is just looking for these details and then zooming in and grabbing those, because they make absolutely fantastic. Small elements that you can use, maybe combine it with other images and more creative shots, or just on their own. They're really rather lovely.
Yeah, excellent point. I think that's it. It's this is one where we have sort of grabbed into quite a lot of the scene, and actually it may even be. And Adrian, if you don't mind, I'm just going to grab the screen back just because of where we're going to end as well. But that's a nice thing to see the end shot. I wonder if, we don't know, do we? It may have been seeing the bird. It may have been just this conglomerate of lines and colors. But actually then if you can spend a moment more just to dig in a little bit more to what was your intent, what really made you stop and look. And it may well have been this gorgeous reflection. And I think the challenge then photographically is, okay, well, if that is what grabbed me, it may not be, I understand, it may have been the bird or whatever it might have been. If that's what stopped you, then think, is what I'm putting in the frame maximizing that intent? And that might be then the time to get a bit closer. But Adrian made a great point. If you're out editing while you're in the field or in the evening when you've had a dinner or whatever, it's a great thing. You can then go and play with that idea that you found. And the next day you've got a little creative kernel.
Yes.
With a K to start playing with. So, well, good news, 100% of people would enjoy more of these sessions, Adrian. And And if you count us,
apart from the 5 or 6 people that we've horribly decimated their images,
brutalized, exactly. Hopefully I've not been too mean to anybody. And a couple of people said one in particular, Catherine, she joined late, but don't worry, you can rewatch this on Facebook, and or if you sign up to the Light and Land newsletter, not only do you get lots of interesting tidbits and general Light and Land news, but you do get the link to view this after the fact a couple of days later on in full HD as well. What I would say, just before we come to a finish, Adrian, thanks very much. It's fantastic for you to join us from the forest.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure. And I like the way we see some things very similarly and see some things very differently. And I think that was a nice recipe for us to go on with this going forward. In terms of what is up next, obviously I do my little bit of housekeeping here. Next week, we're actually doing mobile phone photography with Paul Sanders. So my friend and yours, Paul, we work with quite a lot. And he's going to just share some images that he's done from his mobile and talk about the great flexibility that allows you and some of the apps and all this kind of stuff. So that's going to be a really cool one. And that's next Tuesday. The plan more widely, there's going to be a tiny break after that just for logistical reasons because I'm promised elsewhere. But we're going to be coming back with this creative interpretations idea, the general virtual tours, maybe a bit of print, pixel, whatever it might be. We're going to do a few different things. But if you guys keep coming and keep watching and keep liking and keep commenting and letting us know your thoughts, we'll keep them coming. That's kind of where we're up to at the moment. But for now, Adrian, would you any final words to say goodbye?
Thanks for inviting me, Sam. It's been good fun, and we've had a bit of fun today. So some of these edits might be a little bit beyond what some people would be happy to do, but I should say just enjoy it, have fun with the editing. Nothing's harmed. You can always go back.
Exactly. Non-destructive editing, that's what we like.
Yeah.
And there was a couple of questions that I'm going to put up next time we come up about why we use Lightroom. I didn't want to get into that tonight, but we can maybe cover that a little bit on another session. Great. That's it from us. We shall speak to you again very soon. Cheerio for now.
Bye-bye.